Welcome to Live DAF, your online DAF Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's DAF Hayemi, Bava Kamma DAF Nun Beis. We are holding on the very last line of Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Levi, Hamoicher bayis lechaviri. If one sells a home to another person, Kivan Shem Masar leMafteach Kana, once he hands him the keys, he has now acquired the house. Now, what's going on? Why are the keys considered, the transfer point? Heichi dami. Ibekasbo, if you purchase with money, which is one of the forms of kinyan when it comes to, houses and real estate, likni bekasbo, let that handing over of the money be considered the kinyan. Skip the keys, you have the money. Ibechazaka, if you acquire the home by way of, use, which is called chazaka, taking possession, likni bechazaka, let chazaka do the trick. So again, why do we need to hand over the keys? Lo'elam b'chazaka, you're right. He did chazaka, but typically, together with chazaka has to be accompanied by instructions. Ubay l'mei malay, typically the seller must tell the buyer, in anticipation, in advance of the chazaka, he has to tell him, Leich, chazek ukni, go and be koine by way of chazaka. He has to sort of empower him, authorize him to do so. But in this case, it doesn't need to do that. But once he hands him the keys, that is as though it's tantamount to telling him these words. So, of course, he did chazaka, but because he handed him the keys, he can go and do the chazaka. Furthermore, Amarish Lakish, Mishum Rabbi Yanai. So he quotes Rabbi Yanai, Hamoicher Eida l'chaver. If one sells a herd of animals to another person, once he hands him this thing called mashchuchis, which the Gemara soon will tell us what exactly this is. And Rashi says, a lashon mishicha, of pulling, it sort of leads the whole crowd. So once he gives him this leader, he is koine. Once again, the same question. What kinyan did he employ to acquire the eider of the goats or sheep? Hechidami, ibe mishicha. If he did a mishicha, had the animal, walk towards him or pulled it, likni be mishicha, let that be enough. Why do we need the mashchuchis? Even masira. Now, let's say it was in a place where mashicha does not work. Rashi says, like it was just a rabbim, etc. So mashicha only works, in a place which is, personal. But if it's a public area, you need something called misira. So likni be misira, let them use misira, which means that the seller hands the the reins or whatever over to the buyer. So let that be enough. You're right, he did Mashicha. But the same Torah says before, in order to allow him to do the Mashicha, typically the buyer tells the seller tells the buyer, go and do the Mashicha and be koine. The mashchuchis. But in this case, since he handed him the mashchuchis, it's as though he told him so, Kimanda Amalei, it's as though he told him, Leich, go ahead, Meshecha Kni, do the Meshicha to be koine. Now what is this mashchuchis, right? So it's as though he told him, Leich, Meshecha Kni, dummy. My mashchuchis, what is the mashchuchis? Hacha tirgemu karkashta. So here in Bavel, it was interpreted as something called karkashta. Rashi says, a zug, a bell, which one uses to attract the animals, so it leads the animals. So once he gives him this sort of tool, he is preparing him for ownership. Rav Yaakov Amar, mashchuchis is another thing. It's actually a living thing which can pull the crowd behind him. Iza, it's a goat. Rashi calls him a eiz charif, a sharp, aggressive goat, which sort of leads the stock of sheep behind him. Iza the Oslo Breish Edra. It's the A's that goes ahead of the herd. So that's what he gave him, and that is an indication of future ownership. Like this fellow from Galil area of Eretz Yisrael, he made a he presented a drasha, a lesson, in front of Rav Chizda. It was like a mashal. Kad rog is ra'ayu al ona. When the shepherd gets mad at his herd, avid lenagda samusa. So he blinds this goat, which is the leader, and by doing so, he sort of leads the whole crowd into the bayreis, Rashi says, into the pits, because the goat, because of his blindness, ends up falling down cliffs, and he leads the whole crowd after him, and that's how he sort of punishes the crowd of goats and of sheep. And Rashi says it's a mashal. I'll just read the Rashi inside right before the Mishnah. It's about 15 lines off the top. Kach kishamok nifra. Min Sani Yisrael, when Chas v'Shalom Hashem punishes Yidden, how does he do so? Hashem appoints leaders which are not really suitable, and they, Chas v'Shalom, can lead the community astray. Okay, continues the Mishnah. Kiso Horishan. So we have a boir, a pit, typically used for water storage. It's owned by two people. It's a jointly owned boir. Reuven comes over, uses it, and covers it. Kiso Horishan. Uba Sheni. Umatza Megula. Comes Shimon to use it, and he discovers the pit to be exposed, uncovered. Rashi says, how did that happen? Got wormy, and the wooden lid sort of disintegrated, and there's no lid. Nobody's fault. There's no lid. So, in this case, he should have quickly covered it. So when he failed to cover the pit, he's totally liable. Only the second person, because the first fellow covered it and he had no idea that it was uncovered. So now it falls under Shimon's responsibility. Continues the Mishnah. Suppose a person owns a bar and he covers it properly, responsibly, and somehow an animal falls into it, a chamayr, and dies. Potter. He's totally a potter. He's not responsible. But if he failed to cover it properly and something happened, he's chayav. Continues the Mishnah. Let's say there is a pit, and there's somebody in there digging the pit with a jackhammer, he's making it deeper or wider, and there's a shoyer walking alongside the rim of the pit, and he gets all frightened because of the machinery, nafal of fanav, and he falls headfirst into the pit mikoila kriya, due to the sound and ruckus of the digging, chayav. So the person who made the bar is chayav because he sort of created this obstacle on the street. La'achrav mikoila kriya potter, if the shur got frightened and he jumped back because of this noise and stumbled and fell and got hurt, he's potter. The Gemara will explain exactly what happened. Continues the Mishnah. So one has a pit for which he's responsible for, and an animal falls into it, a shur, an ox with his kalim, with his yoke, with his plow, and everything falls apart and breaks and dies. Or a chamar v'kelev niskaru, a donkey with his saddle and whatever, and tears up and breaks and dies. Chayav ala behema patar ala kalim. We know that you have to pay for the lost animal, but you're a patar for the kalim, and we have a drasha. It says shur v'lei adam, right? Chamar v'lei kalim. Now, it's important to know that although a person is responsible for animals, but not every animal. Listen to this. Let's say the animal that fell into your pit happened to be a cherish, deaf mute animal. Shoita, deranged, imbalanced animal. Vikatan, or a very young animal, which hasn't yet been trained to be careful, to watch out, and steer clear of pits. Only in these cases where the animal could not fend for himself, chayiv, you're responsible. But if it's a shur pikeach, the Gemara calls him, and it's a middle of the day, he's emotionally balanced. Shur, he's on the money. He knows, and it's during daytime where he can see where he's going. You're not responsible. He should have paid close attention. He should have not fallen into your pit. Unbelievable chiddush. Continues the Mishnah. So liability only pertains to animals. But if a person falls into a bar, you're potter, right? And even a ben bas, a young boy or girl who couldn't necessarily fend for themselves and perhaps weren't paying attention, you're still potter. It's exeris hakasiv shoyer v'li'adam, or eved ayama, an eved knani, a maidservant. Perhaps these are considered like just possessions and don't have the same designation as a regular person. The potter still, there's no liability upon these people falling into the bar and dying. Okay, back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Two people own a bar. Reuben used it and covered it. Shimon comes over, sees it uncovered. He walks away. Shimon is responsible. Reuben is potter. V'rishon ademas miftar. Now, we totally hold Shimon responsible, and Reuben is totally absolved. Until what point? I mean, if he got word that the bar is uncovered, perhaps he should have come running and covered it as well. V'rishon ademas miftar. Until what point do we consider Reuben totally potter? Amar Rabbi Yehuda. So Rashi learns until he actually comes there and sees it, until he has first-hand experience, we don't hold him responsible. Ushmul Amar, you don't have to wait that long. As long as he was notified, even if he's far away, he hadn't seen it in person, he should have taken the extra precaution, come down and checked it and covered it. For Rabbi Yehuda Amar, no, we give him more of a leeway, because the fact is he covered it properly. He's not really, he wasn't being reckless. He covered it, and now that he found that, give him some time to put himself together, get some workers, get supplies, and cover the bar. Enough time to be notified, for him to hire workers, chop down some trees to use as a covering. The Mishnah continues, so you cover the bar properly, and an animal falls in, he's potter. How did the animal get in there? How do you... It sort of rotted from within, it got wormy, and that's how it happened. So, not my fault, I'm potter. Here comes an interesting string of questions. So Bnei HaYeshiva wanted to know as follows. Listen to this case. Reuben owns a bar. He covers it responsibly. A kisoy lid that could support oxen walking by. Perfect. But it's not really thick enough to support camels, which are bigger than oxen. And what happened? It so happens that a camel came by. So the camel sort of, weakened the lid. They didn't actually collapse it, but they cracked it, they weakened it, which enabled the ox to fall in afterwards. And then an ox came by and fell through that lid, which had been weakened by the camel. What's the halach? Amri, so the question was like this. What exactly, how often are these camels to be found in this vicinity? If they're, common travelers here, he's totally reckless and careless. You should have expected the camels to do this. You should have gotten a stronger lid. If there are no camels at all, honestly, then he's totally absolved. He didn't have to expect any camels. Must be the asul ifrakim. They come sometimes. So the question is like this. His good luck, the camel showed up, but didn't actually fall through, weakened it. And subsequently, when the shar came, he fell through. So it's sort of a double uncertainty. Who says the camel would come? Who says it would, weaken it for the shar, right? So it's sort of a double uncertainty. Mi amrina, shall we say, given the asul ifrakim, but ultimately we know camels show up sometimes. He was being careless. He should have anticipated this development. Or given the hashta mias leka anasu. On the other hand, you can say, well, after all, they're not commonly found in this area, so you didn't have to expect this whole string of chain of events to happen. Tashma, I'm going to try to prove from our Mishnah, which says kiso koroi. He covered it properly. Okay, so if an accident happened, he's potter, and we don't know yet the terrorist that we said before, that there was a sliya misaycha, there was some sort of rotting, due to worming. No, we're not sure yet exactly what happened. What exactly took place? How did the animal get through the lid, which was a proper lid? if it could have sustained shvarim and gmalim hechanafel. So how did the animal get in there? Elalav, it must be karoi l'shvarim, but like karoi l'gmalim. It was enough for a shar, but not for a gamal. Now, if gmalim are, common passerby, I might potter, so why is he potter? Peshayu, he's negligent. If there are no gmalim at all, pshit, and of course he's potter. Honestly, what do you expect of him? Elalav dasan l'frakim. Apparently, it's exactly as we proposed before. They're here sometimes. And that's exactly what happened. Gmalim came and weakened the lid. And the shvarim came and fell through it. Right? After it was affected by the gamal, Uktani Potter, Mishnah says he's Potter. So that proves our point. Alma, apparently, keeping the hashtaleka, since they're not typically here, the camels, also we consider them an inus. So that solves our riddle. So the Gemara, no. So the response is no. No, this lid was perfect for shvarim, for gmalim, atom bomb proof. But the question was, hey, so how did the animal get through? As we said before, the name of the same Mamoira, the thing rotted through. It was wormed and consumed by teloim, by worms, and therefore he's totally exempt. Toshma, we're going to bring it right from the second part of the Mishnah where it says, like yiso karoiv v'nafel chamar, umei is chayiv. If you didn't cover it properly, animal falls in his chayiv. Hechidami, what exactly took place? Ilema like karoiv l'shvarim, like malim. It's a paper thin lid, can support any animals. Then pshita, of course he's chayiv. Strichel ameima the chayiv. The Mishnah doesn't have to say this chayiv. It's so pashat. It's obvious. Elalav must be speaking karoiv l'shvarim, v'loi karoiv l'malim. It's good for the shor, not for the gamal. Hechidami. How often do the Gmalim come around town? If they're here on a regular basis, so once again he's negligent. Obviously he's chayiv. If they're never here, so what do you want from him? Must be that in between case. They're here sometimes, and that's what happened. The Gamal came and weakened the lid. The shar came and fell through it. Mishnah says he's chayiv. That proves our point. Alma apparently given the aslan frakim b'shehu, since he expects Gmalim to come around sometimes, he's negligent. He should have expected it. Says the word no. No. This lid was enough for a shor, but not for a gamal. And in fact, gemalim are expected to come around. So the question was, well, obviously he's chayiv. Why even mention it? You're right. He was a pesheah. Of course he's chayiv. You're right. This part of the Mishnah isn't really a major chiddush. It's just sort of matching to the first part of the Mishnah. It's a contrast. Once the Mishnah in the beginning speaks about a proper lid, which makes him potter, nasiv seifa, nami, loy kiso karo. So on account of that, the Mishnah continues with the contrasting case. If it wasn't covered properly, he's chayiv, although it's an obvious halach. Ikadamri. So according to this version number one, the question was a lid that could support shvarim and not gmalim. Gmalim come out sometimes, but it didn't actually fall through. He weakened it. The shar came in afterwards. Is he chayiv? Is he not? We're not sure. Ikadamri. Here comes version number two of this question. In this case, just mentioned, of course, there's no question. The kivan, the asyon, the frokim peshahu. He knows, he's aware of the fact that sometimes gmalim chance around here. He's a pesheya. The boilers who could die, he should have expected it. There's no question in that case is chayiv. The question is only hachi with the boiler in the following case. Okay, so we have a new case. Kiso sheyochel lamid b'fnei shvarim. The lid can support shvarim. Ve'eno yochel lamid b'fnei gmalim. Cannot support gmalim. There are gmalim running around here. But it turns out, so he was totally careless, irresponsible with reference to gmalim. But lucky to him, it didn't actually happen that way. The worms ate up his lid, and that's how the shar fell in. Mau. How do we deal with this? On the one hand, we can say, this fellow was totally careless and negligent with respect to the prospect of Gemalim falling into the pit. So really, he didn't really cover his pit properly. So we deem it like an exposed pit. So therefore, he's considered a pesheah for everything. Hava pesheah nami linin hasla. Although, by his good fortune, the lid was not collapsed by Gemalim, rather by teloim, by worms, which is considered out of his control. But it's as though he left the lid uncovered. He's totally responsible. no matter what happens. Or you can say, we don't say because of that, this too. Meaning, sure, if a gamal would have fallen in, he didn't do his job, he's chai. But lucky him, it wasn't so. So, the fact that there were teloim, they ate up his lid, it's not his problem. Tashmai comes a raya from our Mishnah once again. Kiso karoi, right? It's a part 1 of the Mishnah. A properly covered pit. An accident strikes. He's not responsible. Oh, now we come back with that pshat. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Bar Chana. How did the animal get in if it was covered properly? Right? It rotted through and through. And that's why it fell in. But he's still potter. How strong was this lid? What exactly is going on? It could support this and could support that, but it got wormed. Pshita, of course, in this case, the potter. Of course he's potter. What do you expect from him? It was a solid door, a solid lid, but the worms bored through it. Elalav, it must be that it's in a case where it was keroi l'shvarim v'lo keroi l'gmalim. It could support oxen but not camels. Ushchichig malim, and we know there are camels roaming around. But lucky to him, the Gemalim did not collapse his lid, but the Teloim did. And what does the Mishnah say? He's potter, Ktani potter. Alma, apparently, we don't say this. Migo is svara, since he's a pesher, Migo have a pesher, and Gemalim, 4 camels, we treat him as a careless, negligent fellow, have a pesher in Tasla, and we don't give him the Teloim excuse. Right? So we see that we don't apply this rationale. Law, he says that we're not. We're speaking about a lid that can support all animals. It turns out that the worms, collapsed it. Regarding your question, isn't it an obvious halacha? What should he do to protect against teloim? Well, guess what? He could not, fend off the teloim, but he should have come and inspected his lid. Perhaps I would say he should have come every once in a while, tap the lid and see how solid it is. That's what I would think. Kamashmon, here comes the Mishnah and says, no, it's not expected of him. He knows this lid comes with a lifetime warranty, didn't expect it to collapse. Tashma, here comes another attempt at a raya. Again, the question was, a lid that can support shvarim, but not gemalim, who are commonly found. It turns out, lucky him, it wasn't the gemalim that collapsed, it was teloim. What's the halacha? Tashma. Improperly covered pit, an animal falls in, he has to pay. Hey, Chidami, what exactly happened? They can't support any animal. Goes without saying, what do we have to even, right? Of course he's chayiv. It must be this sort of in-between case. It could support cows, but not gmalim. Now, if he expects gmalim to come around, so once again he's careless. And of course he's chayiv. If he never expects gmalim in the neighborhood, then he's an what do you want from him? So it must be this is our case. Gmalim are commonly found, but lucky fellow, the gmalim didn't fall through. The teloim collapsed the lid. Mishnah says that proves our point. Alma Amrina, we say migu dava b'shel inigmal, b'shel inasla. Once a pesheah, always a pesheah. He's totally responsible, even though ultimately with the teloim it wasn't the gmal. Amri, so the answer was like this: it was enough to support the oxen, but not the camels. And we know there are gmalim roaming around. But rather than the gamal falling in, the gamal came and weakened it and cracked it. And that enabled the shar to fall in. And therefore he's chayiv. And regarding your question, isn't this pashut? Because it's a pesheah. Well, you're right. I did the Nasav Reisha Kasol Karoi, Nasav Sefer Nami like you saw. Since the Reisha speaks about a case, we covered it with his potter. On account of that, we bring an opposite case where it's chayiv, although it's a simple halach. So bottom line is, we had a question which we didn't really resolve because it turns out that perhaps the Mishnah is speaking about different cases. So here comes another attempt at a raya, which will actually conclude our discussion. Again, the question was, he's a pesheah for camels, but it turns out that it wasn't the camel that fell in. It was Islam B'Toicha, it was the teloim, the worms that chewed through the lid, that caused the lid to collapse and the shar to fall in. Is he chayiv or not? Tashma. Nafal l'soicha yishor, chere, shaita v'katan, summa, malach balal chayev. Person has a pit, and falls a shor, who's slightly mentally imbalanced. A chere, shaita v'katan. He's blind. It's at night. He wasn't paying attention. So you're responsible. But if it's a pikeach, a healthy, mentally healthy shor, malach bayayim, and it's walking, during the daytime where you can see where he's going, pater, you're not chayev. That's the halach. Why are you pater? Name we can say midahava b'shel in echerish. After all, this pit presented a true hazard for a shor which is a cherish, who can't protect himself. So you're considered negligent with respect to that. So perhaps you're labeled as a negligent party. Hava nami b'shel in a pikeach. So even if a shor pikeach falls in, you should be chayev. You're peshev for everything. Peshev for one, peshev for all. Apparently we don't say this. We don't apply this formula. We don't say this migu svara, and that resolves our question regarding the bar discussed earlier. A bar that could protect from shvarim, but not from gemalim. It turns out that it wasn't really a gamal. It was the tailam that bore. Are you a pesher? No. Shmamina. That proves our point. Okay. So in summary, handing over a key is like telling the person leich hazeku kni. Handing over the mashchuchis, whatever that means, is also considered like leich mishaychu kni. A bar owned by two people. First person covered it, the second didn't. The first person is pater up to a point, and we have three shittas on that in the Gemara. A properly covered bar absolves you. Uncovered bar obligates you. What about a bar covered partially that can withstand one thing and not the other? We had a whole long discussion about it and many questions until we came up with a resolution, at least on one shayla. Shmamina. All the best to you and much hatzlacha to you.